last week we concluded, as far as we were going to go, with this topic of the Sefer Yetzirah, and we said that after the Sefer Yetzirah, the next part of Ma'amar Revi'i, or the fourth essay, pretty much to the end, I don't know if it's the whole way, but a good chunk of it, we're going to look at from another perspective. Let's go back though and understand what's going on here. The king had asked the Rav to tell him, explain some of the chokhmah, the wisdom of the Jewish people in nature. And that was the general question. And led him to the whole topic of creation, the whole topic of what does it mean, God's oneness. It was an interesting, deep discussion. And as the Kuzari continued, which we didn't do the next couple pages, it was quite esoteric. And I felt that we had more to gain by moving on than to keep going through those pages. You're welcome to read them if you have the English. If it's understandable to you, that's great. But even he, the Kuzari, Rav Yehuda Levi himself, said that many of these things are not that intelligible. So we went to the next paragraph, which was paragraph 28, where the king then says, okay, fine. Tell me some other areas of chokhmah, the Jewish people, that are within nature, but also related to science, and how science and Jewish knowledge mesh. And last week, we dealt a lot with the topic of astronomy, with the movement of the stars and the moon, especially the moon, the topic of the molad, the topic of the rebirth of the moon every month, and showed also how the knowledge of the people in the time of the Gemara was far advanced from that time period of history. But the point at that section was, and will be in the next section today, was that it was not that they were teaching these things to teach us about science or to teach us about astronomy or biology, as we're going to see today, but rather they taught us what Judaism has to say about certain areas. And toch kedei, and by the by, and along the way, we're also being taught sciences. We're being taught math, biology, astronomy. So what we're going to do today is finish up the discussion about astronomy, or things that have to do with the heavens. We're going to look at just the last piece of paragraph 29 in a moment. We're going to see some comments from Rav Aviner, and then we're going to start into the next piece, which he then gives us information that has to do with biology. As I was about to set up for today, I had a picture of a brain on my what's it called, PowerPoint presentation for today. I said, I don't know how many people teach Kuzari with a PowerPoint that's going to show a brain, but we will. Ezrat Hashem, we're going to take a look at that in a little while. I had, just as an aside, I took biology because it was a required class in freshman year, which is the dumbest year to have to give it, I think, to give teenagers, 13 years old, start teaching about the reproductive system and all. Was not a smart move, at least not in the 70s, early 70s. But I had a horrifically bad teacher. It was his first year teaching, who had a severe speech impediment. And as a 13-year-old kid, I thought I was hysterical. I made fun of him a lot and ended up in the principal's office a lot, which led me to my one and only D in all my entire life of school. I mean, I was a pretty good student, thank God, but not with that class. So I never really learned biology properly, at least not in school. So we're going to learn a little of that today. Okay, so we are late in paragraph 29. If someone has the book and wants to say what page it is, it's about 3/4 of the way through. It had just talked about Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, and now it's about to talk about a man named Shmuel. If anyone has the book, you want to tell me what page, that'd be great. In the meantime, I'm going to start. He already mentioned 3 or 4 different things in the Gemara that show the wisdom and knowledge of the people of that time period, far beyond the level of knowledge of in that time period of history. And also he quoted a couple other people, non-Jews, how that knowledge of the Chachamim was even far superior to that was known as the greatest at the time. Ushmuel mechachmei Gemara, and Shmuel was one of the wisest in the Gemara. Shamar, who said, Nihirin li shvilei de rekia ki shvilei de neherda. Neherda is the name of a city in Babylonia. He said that the paths in the heavens are as clear to me as the streets of Bavel. What does that mean? Of Neherda. What does that mean? It means that he understood the movements of the constellations and the stars and the sun and the moon and everything out there. What was his involvement? Do you think he woke up one day and said, you know what? I love astronomy. Let's learn about the stars. No, it was his involvement in that had to do with a Torah-based approach to why does Hashem have this? And what does this have to do with Judaism? What does this have to do with Torah? It's because the only way you can really know, understand in depth the movements of the moon, when it's revealed, when it's hidden, when it's considered the beginning of the month, when it's all that had to do with knowledge of the celestial bodies. And in order to do that, you had to have some very great knowledge. So in other words, a person, let's say, for example, I decide one day to learn physics. I think I mentioned this once before. This is another class that was another winner for me. I took physics for 35 minutes. I walked into class and left it before the end of the first class. It was an elective in high school. I didn't like the class, so I left. But over the years, every once in a while, I say to myself, you know what, that was dumb. I should know physics. It's something important. So I go to Khan Academy online, and I start to watch a few classes. That's great. Why am I learning physics, though? What's it going to do for me? Truth is almost nothing, because what it's going to do for me is going to give me some more knowledge. Doesn't help my understanding of Torah. Depends how I apply it. But, so that's one approach. What if, though, someone said to me, in order to give a psak halacha, to give a rendering, a halachic decision on something, of an item, I need to know the physics of it before I can decide what to do with it, as far as halacha. So now I learn the physics in order to apply it to halacha. So that's a different approach. Now I'm learning it because I need it for halacha. I need it for Torah. So what they did was they would learn, they would learn the astronomy and the physics of the movements of everything in the heavens, but for the purpose of knowing it for Torah, not because they wanted to write a book about astronomy. Also, which we talked a little bit about last week, the 4 different seasons of the year, the 2 equinoxes, the 2 solstices, which are the opposites in the northern versus the southern hemisphere. You really can't know properly and know the seasonal changes. I'm not talking about the leaves changing colors. I'm talking about when is the exact moment of spring, when is the exact moment of these different changes, where is the autumnal equinox, and what does that have to do with anything, and how did that affect things in the Beit HaMikdash, for example, of Tu B'Shvat time. The only really way to know those things, again, is to have the good science background to be able to know those. And again, they didn't learn the science in order to learn the science. They learned the science to be able to apply it to Torah. It's impossible, someone who delved into all this, to do so without really knowing the general knowledge base of astronomy. Now, we had a long paragraph here about how astronomy was one of the first things that the Kuzari is turning to the king and saying, here, I'll show you Chokhmah that you know about, and how the Jews knew about this already centuries before. Remember, we're approximately the 13th century in this book, and we're talking about stuff that they already knew 700-800 years before, at least. Okay, so let's take a look at Rav Aviner and what he tells us. Okay. Oh, it helps if I share the screen. Oh gosh, I'm looking at it like you already see it in front of you. Let's try that again. Boom, share, there. Now you should see it in front of you, correct? Yes, I can just shake your head. You see this? This is the part where you go yes. Or no, do you see my screen?
Yes.
Very good, thank you. Okay, the best example that the Rav can start with is astronomy. The knowledge of astronomy by Chazal, which meant, again, Chachamenu Zichronam Livracha, our sages, is amazing. Was even more accurate than any of the non-Jewish world was able to accomplish or acquire at that point. You remember, we looked at the idea, which he's going to mention now, of about the molad, the amount of time it takes for the moon to go through an entire cycle, which we said, which you can see right below, 29 days, 12 hours, and 793 chalakim, 33 and a third, 3 and a third minutes, or 33 and a third minutes, seconds. That it took NASA years and years of research to come up with. They were off by like 1/1,000,000th or something like that. So let's take a look. We said that already just now, that the length of a month is 29 days, 12 hours, 793 chalakim. This is the precision up to 1,000th of a minute. I'm losing my voice here. Wait. 500th of a second. The equivalent of 1/10 of a minute in a million years. Sorry, 10 parts out of a million per year. That's the precision. We're talking about before calculators, before computers, before everything.
It's 1 in 10 million parts.
Thank you.
Not 10 out of a million.
1 in 10 million parts. Thank you. Till this very day, in the course of thousands of years, there's been absolutely no time when this has been messed up. Even if you take into consideration, well, now that we have computers and fancy schmancy things, now we're going to really show what it is. No, it still holds water. Same thing is true with the time period of a solar year, which we again looked at last week. 365 days a year. Another quarter of a day is added to that. 365.2422, which is the amount of a Tkufat HaChama, 365.2422 days. This small amount, we know this, that every year, this 0.2422 of a day keeps adding up. 365 and a quarter, 365.242 starts to add up. What happened was that the Pope, at one point in history, discovered that there was a mistake in the calendar because this little bit of change per year started to pile up, and realized that their calendar was actually off by 10 full days. So as an example, when it should have been the 10th of March, it was the 20th of March already. And what they did was he went to sleep on the 10th of March, and you woke up on the 21st of March. The Russian church, the Russian Orthodox Church, did not involve themselves in this and didn't change. Therefore, till our day, I don't know if you ever noticed, but I'm sorry to mention this in this class, but he does bring this up in the Kuzari in a couple places, that the date that the Christian world celebrates of December 25th, there's two dates. There's a December 25th date, and there's a date in January, because the difference between the Russian Orthodox Church and the rest of the world as far as this date, because they did not take into consideration this change. And all different other kinds of changes or differences in the various Christian calendars. Eitz al Muslimim, by the Muslims. The issue of the length of the year by the Muslims doesn't even come into consideration. Their year is only what we call a year, is only moons or months. And we know that because they are only a lunar calendar, that their holidays, and most notably that we would know, is the month of Ramadan, changes from year to year because they don't have a change, or they don't adjust for that. So what do we have? So we have one of probably the greatest astronomical items that is at least we're somewhat aware of in Judaism, is the topic of the Molad, which we talked a little bit about last week. I'm going to read some of this, not the whole thing, what Rav Aviner says about the secret of the Sod HaMolad. I'm thinking Chag HaMolad. That's terrible. Never mind. Okay. Sod HaIbur. Lo kein beluach ivri, as opposed to the non-Jewish world calendars. Wait a second. Okay, I have to send out. Let me send the link one more time now to Esty didn't get it. Just a minute. Oh, why am I there? Let's go to Kuzari. Sorry, 1 second. I don't want her to get lost. Why is this not going up? I'm going to stop sharing the screen for 1 second. Let me copy the link. My apologies. Go back here. Paste. Okay. Okay, I sent that. Fine. Now let's go back to where I was. Okay. So as opposed to the non-Jewish calendars, the Jewish calendar, it is extremely, extremely accurate. Minyanenu hino shiluv ben shnat hashemesh u'shnat halevana b'sibuch astronomi adir. I mentioned this last week, that our calendar, the Jewish calendar, is a combination of a lunar and a solar calendar. Well, wait a minute, isn't our regular non-Jewish calendar the same thing? Today is March 10th. So isn't it also, we have months in a year? Those months are arbitrary. They divided, originally the year was divided into 10. You know this, the year was originally divided into 10 months. Why is the month of November, which means 9, and December, which means 10, DEC is 10, not 12? So how'd that happen? How do we have November, the month of November, which was the 9th month, that's hence the name NOV, and the month of December, DEC, is 10, like decimeter, decalogue, etc. But they're the number 11 and 12 because 2 months were added to the year. You know which 2? Anyone want to guess? Maybe you know. To the best of my recollection, June and July were added. July for Julian and Julius, and forgot June. I forgot. Okay, but they were added. Okay. Anywho, so our calendar, the Jewish calendar, is a combination of a lunar and solar, because there is no solar month, and there's no such thing as a lunar year. Months are months based on the movement of the moon, and the year is a year, the movement of the earth relative to the sun. That's what the Chachamim referred to in the Gemara and other places, the secret of the Ibur. The Ibur means the birth, but the pregnancy of the whole idea of being the intercalating of the month of the year of Adar Sheni as example. The Rambam Hilchot Kiddush HaChodesh. Kol ele kruchim becheshbonot mada'iyim svuchim me'od. Rambam Bilchot elu lo matzanu kesef Mishnah. Rav Shar nosei kelim shish mehem lo yarad lo'umka shel mada'iyot ma'adayut svucha zo. He said, interestingly, if you look in the Rambam at Hilchot Kiddush HaChodesh, where the Rambam discusses the rules of Kiddush HaChodesh, of how you decide how the month is a new month, and how you decide if there's going to be a leap year, etc. There are no commentaries, the normal commentaries of the Rambam, no Kesef Mishnah, no Magid Mishnah, there's nothing, because even those people who commented on throughout the Rambam, they didn't understand the depth of this and couldn't comment. ומעיד על עצמו בענווה שלו זכה לרדת לעומק כוונת הרמב"ם הלכות הללו. The Ravad, who is one of the commentaries, actually very often disagrees with the Rambam. He said that only the Rambam was able to understand all this, and even he himself, meaning the Ravad himself, said, I don't have a clue what he's talking about. ובוודאי שהרavad שלא הבין את דברי הרמב"ם, הוא עדיין לעילה מכל שתת ושפחתה, מכל אסטרונומים הנוצרים ששגו בעשרה ימים. ששגו בעשרה ימים. כך דרך משל. אנו יודעים בדיוק מהו אורך שנת השמש. We know exactly how long a year is. מה היחס המדויק בין סיבוב הירח וסיבוב השמש. We also know the relationship, the exact relationship between the what's it called? What goes around? The earth goes around the sun, the wait a minute.
You're looking for the word orbiting?
The orbit, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. The orbit, we know the exact relationship of the orbit of the moon and the sun. We know that whenever there is a leap year, as there will be next year, Bezrat Hashem, that it is in order to see to it that Nisan, the month in which we will celebrate Pesach Haba Aleinu L'Tova soon, will always fall in the time period of spring. Now, spring is not because you hit March 21st and now it's the winter, it's springtime and wow, now okay. It's not a matter of figuring it out to March 21st. It's a matter of what it has to be. This is a zodiacal sign of Aries. When Aries is at a certain location, that is the beginning of. Now, it's not because we believe in the zodiacal symbols, and it's what its relationship to halacha is that's the beginning of halachic spring, and Pesach can never be before that. And this astronomical calculation is an amazing exacting calculation based on the movement of the zodiacal sign of the Taleb of Aries. Agav, by the way, I told you I wasn't going to read the whole thing, but I am. I'm kind of going quickly through it. Agav, מזכיר החבר כי גם בין הגויים היה תוכן אחד ויחיד, שהגיע לדיוק שהוא קרוב בחשבונותיו לזה. Next page. והחבר מביא לשון הגמרא. Okay, you're right. I'm not going to do this one. Right? I didn't want to do this slide. Fine. We're going to leave it here. Tov. Okay. Now, what I want you to do is right before paragraph 30, and read the last couple lines. Okay, I'm going to take a look at that. And then we're going to read a very long, I'm not going to get through the whole thing today, a long lesson in biology, a lesson in the unbelievable knowledge of the Chachamim centuries before what we know as modern medicine and modern knowledge. Okay, so the last couple lines of paragraph 29, again, this is the Rav, the Chaver, speaking to the king. This is what I was saying to you before. This knowledge that they came to about nature and everything else was, in a way, wasn't there to teach the Chokhmah. There wasn't a class and say, like, you have to take astronomy 101, you have to take biology 103. Don't you think they would have books with these areas of Chokhmah? Now, whatever that means, I'm not going to get into yet because we're going to see in a moment. We'll look at one short paragraph from Rav Aviner right now, and then we're going to take a look at the introduction to this whole biology section. Is this it? Yeah. Where it says Chaver Mosif. Chaver Mosif Dvarim Binyan Chokhmat HaTeva. The Chaver adds another general comment about the knowledge of nature, chimia, physica, v'chen hala, when it comes to chemistry, physics, etc. He says, don't think that just astronomy is the source of our knowledge and our chokhmah, of our wisdom, but you should know that the Gemara is filled with topics such as chemistry, physics, and other areas. There are those who gathered up and took into one book all these different scientific items that appear in the Gemara. We've quoted him a couple times before. There's a man, Reb Shem Tov Geffen, who lived in the prior generation. I don't think he died it was in the 60s even, maybe a little earlier. Hayat Talmid Chacham Gadol. He was a tremendous Talmid Chacham. Mekubal Gadol. He was also a Kabbalist. Ish Mada. He was also a scientist. Dagul. V'gam Filosof Kantiani Gadol. He was very much of a Kant, from Kant, K-A-N-T, of a Kantian philosopher. Basically, you're a normal underachiever. Halali Ket Yediot Min Gemara. He gathered together. That's not the right word. He is a malaket. It means together. It's not. There's an actual word for that. I need to go to an Ulpan in English. The Kibitzan B'Sefer, and he put them all together into one book. Derech Mashal. Mishin Shachol Kelev Shoteh. Ein Ma'achilon Oto Michatzar Kaved Shelo. Rabbi Matya ben Cheresh Matir. This is a Gemara in Masechet Yoma. It's actually mentioned also in the Mishnah, rather. It says someone was bitten by a wild dog. You don't try to give him a refuah, a cure, by feeding him part of his chatzar kaved. It has to do with his liver. And Matya ben Cheresh permits this. Now, what does that even mean? So let me read the rest of the sentence. Domem me'at lechisun shel Pasteur. We are aware of Louis Pasteur as the person who gave us pasteurization of milk. Wow, pretty cool. He discovered something that has his name on it. Yeah, funny guy. But one of the things that he is well known for is basically giving the world the idea of the concept of vaccines.
That was Edward Jenner.
Yeah, yes, but Pasteur.
Sorry? Pasteurization is from Pasteur. That was his invention.
Yes, it was. But if you take a look at Pasteur also, you will find him connected to vaccinations.
Yeah, but it was after Jenner.
Yeah.
The word vaccine comes from vacca for cow in Latin.
Vacca's cow,
because it was cowpox that Edward Jenner used to discover the method.
Interesting. Okay, good. I sit corrected. So he tells us that the knowledge that was known in the Mishnah, time of Mishnah, is already something that centuries later would be made use of. We mentioned this last week in the text that the pasuk in Tilim that says that all the light of the stars of light should give praise to God. By implication, it means that there are stars that don't have light. There are those stars that are not seen by human eye. What are those? We know this. We talked about this last week. These are what we call black holes. What is that? They are stars that don't have their own light. They don't reflect any light because the gravitational pull is so strong that even light can't escape. Those are called black holes. Is actually different. I'm being very general right now, but they already understood in the time. This is a pasuk in Tilim that we already knew the concept that there were certain stars that did have light or gave off light or reflected light, and some that didn't. V'od kahena v'chahena, many other examples. Kol hayadiyot halalu b'chazal lo huvu ela nitzchu le'ez limud al-chilchati. Agmara enana sefer mada. He makes a very important point, which I've made already twice, and I'm going to make it again. All these things, all this knowledge of astronomy, and now soon we'll see biology, was not brought for the purpose of teaching Madaim, to teach science, but rather it's in there as a part of a halachic discussion. Now, let's see where this takes us to a little bit of a different point. If you take a look now at the beginning of paragraph 30, the Kuzari, the king, asks a question. He asks a legitimate question, I would think. By the way, many times does he not only does he ask legitimate questions, we've seen where the king himself, where the Rav himself says, boy, that's a great question. You're right. Okay. Amar Kuzari. Ve'ech avdu as-sefarim ahem shayu bechavana v'nisharu elu shehem b'mikreh. He says, I don't understand something. You're telling me that there obviously were books there, not necessarily from the Jewish people. There had to have been books that existed with science and with biology, with biology and astronomy and chemistry and physics. How would those books gone? We have none of those books in existence, but your book, the Talmud, that only derech agav and by the by teaches science and these things, that we have in our hands. How did that happen? How did that occur? So while he's going to answer this question, he's not really going to get too deep into that, but he's going to use that question as a jumping off point for getting into a large area of biology that is found throughout the Gemara and how it is another proof of the knowledge of Chazal so long before the actual world caught up to us. Okay, so I'm going to read part of paragraph Lamed Aleph now, where it starts Amar HaChaver. First, he does address the question as to how is it those books are gone and the Talmud still is here. Amar HaChaver, Mipnei she'asfarim hahem hayu yodim otam hayechidim mibnei adam. He says, I'll tell you a very legitimate, logical reason why those books are gone. They disappeared. They're extinct. Because the majority of the time, those books were in the hands of a few select individuals. Ikarei zeh chozeh could have been the hand of a person known as an astronomer. perhaps a doctor, a surgeon. Al derech dimion is an example. Utchilat mishi ovad me ha'uma avuda inam ela hachashovim shabahem. When a nation is lost, dispersed, disbanded, spread out, not destroyed necessarily, but just it moves along. Who are the first quote unquote casualties of that type of dispersion? That would be the upper echelon, the upper tier of the community. Then the next level on the totem pole. And because of that, those individuals are lost and their chokhmah, their wisdom is gone. And what was left behind? Only sifrei torot asher hamon tzrichim alehem, only books that the masses needed. V'yodim otam rov ha'am, v'kotvim otam u'mitaskim bahem harbe. V'asher nigdar b'sifrei haTalmud me'achachamot hahem. So therefore, all things that are learned in the Gemara nishmar v'nishar ba'avur rov yodeihem v'hashgachatam alehem. All the knowledge. It's not that there were no books whatsoever. I mean, how did the Chachamim know some of these things? They had to have learned it somehow. There were Yechidim, there were people who were very well versed in some of these things. Those people are gone, their books were gone, along them with their knowledge, but the knowledge remained among the Jewish people. And what did that do? What did that knowledge do for us? So let me give you, not a mashal, but like a little, I guess, kind of a parable. Let's assume that, I won't say you because it's a Birayin Hara. A person is with a friend and they're traveling, they're taking a hike. They're here in the desert. And while they're hiking, their friend they're hiking with trips and falls down the side of one of the mountains. Not killed, but injured pretty badly. They never, the person who was okay never studied medicine. The person who is on the ground never studied medicine. One's an accountant, one's a teacher, but the guy who didn't fall did take an intense first aid class. And therefore he has that knowledge of how to maybe put the leg in a splint, how to tie a tourniquet, whatever the person on the ground might need. Did he learn the first aid in order to go into business as a teacher, to be a paramedic? In this case, in my case, no. But he had the knowledge. But he uses that knowledge, therefore, to save this person's life, or to hopefully make sure he doesn't lose his leg. In a similar fashion, the knowledge that was known at the time period of history was known beyond the Jewish world, but not to the same degree. And the Jews, the Chachamim, took it and ran with it and used that knowledge and brought it into the Torah world and made a synthesis of the two to give us unbelievable information that is mind-boggling when you really think about it. Take a look now. Let's continue, where it starts with the words umizeh kol ma shenizkar. In order to, not anymore, unfortunately, but in order to get smichat chachamim, to get the title rabbi, there's obviously no different than any other degree, there's a curriculum, things you have to learn. My generation was apparently one of the last generations that when learning for smicha to become a rabbi, were taught the halachot of shchita and trefot. In other words, how to shecht an animal, what makes the animal kosher when you've checked the animal, what kind of things within the animal, any diseases, any imperfections that make the animal kosher, not kosher, chickens, etc. And I had to learn that. I learned actually how to shecht. That wasn't part of the curriculum, but I liked the learning of it so much that I actually learned how to shecht animals. I didn't finish, but I shechted quite a bit of different animals. The joke was that I was dating my wife at the time. She wasn't my wife, obviously. Her maiden name is Shoichet. And I came to her, I said, I want to become a Shoichet and I want her to become a Shandalav. So she thought it was cute and she married me just because of that stupid line. I'm sure that was the only line. Anyways, but when you open up and you look at the inside of an animal, no different than checking the anatomy of a human being. Obviously, there are many, many moving parts and things that have to work in sync. We've already talked about a little bit before when it came to the human body. We talked a little bit about this whole idea of the knowledge of the human body by Chazal and how things work together and the whole idea behind Asher Yatzar. This all came out already to us in the Kuzari. But now he's going to use the knowledge of trefot, of the things that with inside of an animal that make the animal kosher or not kosher. In other words, you take a cow as a kosher animal, but just because it's a kosher animal doesn't mean if you shecht it properly, doesn't mean you can eat it. You have to do certain bidikot. The most common one that has to be done is the lungs. You cannot not check the lungs. You check them when they're physically still inside the animal. I'm not going to describe how. And you check them when they've been removed from the animal. I learned how to do that also. And then along the way, you check other parts of the animal. And if certain things happen, and we're going to see examples, then the animal cannot be eaten and it goes to treif. And take a look where it says, so from here, from this knowledge of anatomy, the Chachamim in the Gemara and then later time of Rabbi Yosef Karo, which is after this time period of the Kuzari, who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, or gave us the halachot of treif and kosher when it comes to shechting. This most of what he's about to tell us will be found in the Gemara Masachet Chulin. When you also get smicha, if you have to learn the Chot Shchita and Chot Trefot, you start by learning this particular parak in Chulin, a Gemara. He said that most of the knowledge of the anatomy of the animal, and by extension, a lot of it by humans, that was known in the time of the Gemara, wasn't even known by Galen. Galen was known, he lived in the 2nd century and into almost the 3rd century, was known at that time as the world's authority. I guess when there were only a couple million people in the world, no, it's more than a couple million. It's easy to be an authority on something, but he was known as the world's authority on anatomy. He's saying that the knowledge the Jews had at the time of the Talmud, and even before that, was greater than that of Galen. Now, Galen was before the Talmud, obviously, because the Talmud starts in approximately year 200, which is when he died. He died in 199. So the year 200 is approximately the time the Mishnah was finished. So around the same changeover time period. If that's not the case, lama lo zachar becholaim ma she'anu roim oto be'einenu b'ma she'ida Torah alav mecholei hareya v'alev. So he says, what happened to my screen? It's just weird. Okay, you're all back there. Okay. He said, if Galen knew some of these illnesses within the animal's body, and then again, by extension, the human body, why didn't he mention any of these things? And he's going to give us a list of a few things that are known as already in the time of the Gemara, and then before that in the Mishnah, that the Torah already tells us. For example, when it comes to the lung, the lung and the heart. Kamo, for example, samuch lalev v'samuch ladofen. When the lung was somehow attached to the heart or attached somehow to the rib cage, when now I mentioned last week or at some point, let me finish the sentence. So it means like this. There are a few things he lists that we knew already in the time of the Mishnah that Galen doesn't even mention. What are some of those things? He tells us. Number one, let me take a look and go in the order of this. Besides the two things that could be connected, and a human being has 2 lobes to their lungs, a right lung and a left lung. An animal has 3 and 2. They're 3 and 2 like this. So what happens is, for example, this is going to be maybe a little education for some of you that may not be aware of this. You're familiar with the terminology glat. In Hebrew, it's called chalak. What is chalak or glat? It means smooth. What is smooth? That you buy the meat, it's nice and smooth. There's no marks on it. It's not what it means at all. If you have the lungs are like this, 3 and 2, that if there's what are called sirchot or adhesions between that look like little rubber bands in some cases between the lobes on the animal, depending on the kind of sircha, by Ashkenazim, if they're removable and the lung is still smooth, then it's considered okay. By Sfaradim, if they're anything like that, any adhesions whatsoever, you can't you can't eat that meat, even if they could be removed and the flesh is still smooth. The reason being that those sirchot, those adhesions came because of a puncture, and therefore there's a problem with the lung potentially. So galat or chalak means that the lung, all the lobes were smooth, didn't have the adhesions. Chalak Beit Yosef or chalak by Sfaradi means they didn't have any adhesions and that they're completely smooth from the time they were checked. By Ashkenazim, it means they are smooth now, even though they may have had certain adhesions that were removable. So this idea that
is what, by the way, that's why I joked to the Haredi owner of a Halavi restaurant when I saw his to that hechsher.
Yes, I've seen that stuff. They say the glat
It's given by
Halavi.
the glat department. No,
So
wait a
it
minute.
takes that,
I
right.
joked because it's given by the glat department of Rabbanut Yerushalayim.
Right, which makes no sense. It makes no sense
Makes no
because
sense at all.
but it takes on the terminology or the meaning. It's a milah she'ula in a sense that like it means it's like super kosher, like it's extra kosher, which is I know. So same mahadrin. Correct. I agree. Halavai, those should be our biggest problems in kashrus in Israel.
Halavai.
Hey, what a mess. Okay. Anyways, so we have the issue with the lungs of. Let me go back to it. So you have also chesronam yitronam. When it comes to trefot, when it comes to saying if an animal is kosher or not after it's been shechted properly, is if there's a part, let's say part of a lung is missing, or there's an extra lobe that's no good, it makes it no good. The avesh or the yovesh or the lung is dried or it's mushy. All these things make the animal not kosher. Why? So first of all, the basic halacha reason is the animal would not survive healthfully for a year. The Chachamim determined that if these kind of sirchot, these adhesions, or the extra lobe, or minus a lobe, or the dryness, or the mushiness, all those are determined to be fatal to the animal within the year. And an animal that was not going to live for a year is considered treif, even though it's been shechted properly and cannot be eaten. They already knew this idea that the animal could not survive with these, and it doesn't appear anywhere in Galen's books. Umidiatam, and they're also their further knowledge of the relationship between both the physical and spiritual organs of the body. We talked a little bit about this a few weeks ago. We talked about the organs, the parts that are above the diaphragm, relative to things below the diaphragm. Mashamru, for example, that they said, Shnei krumot yesh lamoach uchenegdam lebeitzim, these various glands that are in the body, that are in the brain, and are in the man's beitzim. Ve'amru b'min shnei polim yesh munachim al pi hakdera. And they also say that it should be, I thought, kimin. Okay, that at the base of the brain there are two nodules, two somethings. Mina polim v'lifnim. From that point inwards, moach. It has the rule of brain. Mina polim v'lachutz. And from that point out, it's considered part of the spinal column. What's he talking about? Show and tell. Nope. I want this. Okay. Here's the brain, which is an unbelievable body in the organ. That if you talk to anybody who's in the medical world, they will tell you that the part of the body they know the least about is the brain. They know a tiny fraction of what the brain is all about. In any case, the question is, where does the brain end and the spinal column begin? So we know that there's the base of the spine. There's the base of the brain, and then it connects obviously to the spine. We also know if there's a spinal cord injury, God forbid, and there's the lack of connection between the spine and the brain, could have a little problem with that. But where exactly does the brain end and the spine begin? But because they're connected. So in here, I forgot the medical term. There's a word for it. I have to look it up. I forgot. Is where both halachically and anatomically is considered the end of the brain. And by the way, who cares? So when you talk about the issues of brain death, when you talk about the issues of injuries, and you talk about other things, both in terms of the human and then talk about the animal, because it makes a difference if there's a problem with the brain of the animal, a problem with the difference if it was with the spine of the animal. So this cutoff point was already known by Chazal already centuries and centuries ago. Ve'amru, and also they said, Tlata knei havo, there are three arteries, chad parish lereya, chad parish lekavda, and should also say chad parish lemoach, that there are three arteries, one that goes toward the heart, one that goes to the lung, one that goes to the liver. And also their vast knowledge of illnesses that would cause death and wouldn't cause death. Mashamu, for example, that they said, if the spinal column has in it its fluid, one second. If the spinal column with its skin, so it's not skin, but it's covering, and with the moach inside of it is intact. Moach doesn't mean brain in this case. It means the fluid in it. Then everything's good. And they said, it also tells us, though, that a person who has a problem with their spinal column fluid could be sterile. Now, they're telling us that they already know, and by the way, this is a scientific fact I checked into, this causes reproductive problems for the man. If there's a problem, forget the other obvious problems you have with spinal fluid issues, that it causes a problem with reproductive organs, with his ability to have children. That they already knew in the time of the Gemara. V'amru, and furthermore, they said, Krum sha'ala machmat maka b'reya eno krum. It'd be good if I would remember English. Let me say it just a minute. A membrane that would come out with if there was a makkah, if the animal got injured and there was some membrane that grew over it on the reya, on the lung. That a membrane that grew over a makkah, over an injury on the reya, is not considered a membrane that's covering it properly, which means it's not kosher. And furthermore, they said, they already knew the anatomy of a chicken, knew that it didn't have a gita nasheh, because it also didn't have the specific spot in the animal that it would require to have a gita nasheh. Now, there's about 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 8 or 9, maybe 10 more examples he's going to give of biology. I'm not going to continue yet with that now. We'll continue it next week. Next week will be the last class, Bezrat Hashem, before we take a little break for Pesach. Why doesn't he just give 1 or 2 examples? Why didn't he give 1 example of astronomy, 1 example of biology, Shalom HaYisrael, and just move on? What do you think? I mean, just give us about the molad. That's enough. Tell us about the fact that we know they knew about the brain having 3 the layers and the why? Why so many examples? I think. Yeah, go ahead.
The more examples you give, the closer to 0 are the chances that you happen to know the molad only by chance. It was a good guess. Right. Or the 3 arteries, etc.
Exactly. That's exactly right. The more you show, it shows there's less chance. It's actual knowledge. Very good. So that's why he spends some time on astronomy and a lot of time on biology. I don't remember what else he's going to get into after that. I don't think he gets. I hope he doesn't get into chemistry. Never liked chemistry either. I wasn't a sciences person. Now I am, but not back in school. Anyways, like you care. So have a good day. We'll meet up again next week, Bezrat Hashem, same time. And we'll learn a little more biology together. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bakasha.